Good afternoon. I hope you are not feeling sleepy after delicious lunch. My name is İdil Gaziulusoy. I am Associate Professor of Sustainable Design in Aalto University, leading our Sustainable Design Research Group at NODUS for 8 years now. I also have just become the Program Director of our Creative Sustainability Master's Program, which is a multi-school interdisciplinary program including design, business, and engineering. So, because it's fashionable to do so, I would like to get a little bit personal with you and tell you about my childhood. I decided to become a professor when I was 6 years old. There's a reason behind that. My mom was the librarian of the headquarters of United Nations in Ankara, Turkey, which is where I'm from. So I really grew up in the middle of social environmental problems from a very young age. And I knew about climate change approximately 20-25 years ahead of my peers. Talk about a happy childhood. So at that age, I did not know what type of a professor I wanted to become. But my research question was, how can I make the world to become a better place? And that research question is still my broad research question, with, of course, a lot more nuance and a lot less naivety. And I'm a geographic and academic traveler. So my first degree was in engineering, because, you know, what do you do if you are going to save the world? Engineering. And I am very grateful for my engineering formation, because it's a solid formation for all sorts of things. However, during my engineering education, one thing upsetted me quite a lot, and that was the lack of consideration of humans. We were developing these machines, tools, technologies, science, everything. But for whom and for what purpose? I did not know that. I started to do a master's degree in industrial design. Of course, design is human-centric, so there is a lot more thinking of human needs than just, you know, pushing technology for the sake of pushing technology into the market. And that was when I started to essentially be very, very interested in sustainability, because I had found an alignment with the research that I can do and my life's purpose of, you know, making the world a better place. But after my master's, I was also pretty disgruntled with design education, because I really wanted to understand sustainability, what it meant, the theories behind it. And design schools were not yet then equipped to give me that knowledge. So I moved to New Zealand out of anywhere possible in the world and did my PhD in sustainability science. So I learned about complex adaptive systems. I learned about the complexity of social, ecological, technical systems and how they're entangled, and etc., and how difficult it is actually to achieve sustainability, but also how you know, the ways that we can do that. But I built all of the new learnings from my PhD onto my background, and I did my PhD answering the question, how can I help design and innovation teams to align their day-to-day decisions and design actions with long-term sustainability change that is coming. And I developed a scenario method for the use of companies, and my kind of really you know, summary conclusion was that company strategy has to mediate between societal vision and what the design and innovation teams do on a day-to-day basis. I am a global pioneer, and this is not my words, in an area, a new area of design research and practice that I refer to as design for sustainability transformations. Previously, I referred to as design for sustainability transitions, and it is popularized as transition design. None of this matters, semantics. But my research resides at this dark orange area, so at the intersection of design and innovation research, sustainability science and transitions research, and futures and anticipation studies. And in my talk, I'm going to walk you through from sustainability science to design and innovation and to futures and anticipation studies, and it is going to add up. I promise. Can I see the hands of people who is familiar with this, even if just a little bit? Have you seen this before? Okay, good. So I am happy that I'm not going to repeat something that majority of you have seen before, so that's why I asked. So this is work from Stockholm Resilience Center. And this work started in 2009. It is essentially an endeavor to measure the physical boundaries of Earth's physical systems and how much we have breached. And this is the third iteration, published last October in 2023. And according to this work, this is massive work, as you can imagine, as you know, being you. According to this, we have breached 6 out of 9 physical system boundaries of the Earth, and very, very severely, as you can see. So the green part is the safe operating space. So we need to be inside this, but we have breached severely 6 of those. So this is about physical systems. Let's come to social foundations, because sustainability is not only about physical systems and materiality. So what you see here at the background is actually an earlier version of the planetary boundaries framework. But the green one is Kate Raworth's work. So some of you, again, might be familiar with the popularized name of this work, known as donut economics. So Kate Raworth did her research in Oxfam back in early 2010s, and she has found out, because she was very inspired by planetary boundaries work, but being an economist, she was wondering, okay, but how are we doing in terms of, social foundations? And her research found that we are not also meeting any of the foundations. So by many, this moment of human history has been defined as, a polycrisis moment, an urgency moment, etc. But I'm not going to go in there. If you want to get depressed, you just need to read newspapers. So when we talk about sustainability these days, we're actually talking about 3 interrelated concepts. The first is, of course, sustainability, but sustainability is about reducing impact. It is about mitigation. And this is the basis. We need to stop the harm that we have been doing. Though it is not enough, even if we stopped, for example, I'm just going to give climate change example, but climate change is not, of course, it's a huge issue, but it's not only our urgent issue. But if we stopped greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, Earth's temperature has warmed 1.1 degrees compared to in pre-industrial levels already. And it is projected to rise at the moment to 3.6 degrees Celsius. The safe level by scientists is said to be ideally 1.5, but maximum 2. But the country pledges show that we are going towards a 3.6 degrees Celsius world. This is very serious. So even though we put the 3.6 doom and gloom aside, even though even the 1.1 degrees increase that has already happened is going to have unfolding impacts on our environment and life in the coming decades, centuries, also thousands of years. So according to a paper in Science, our impact on the oceans will still be visible 100,000 years from now on. So we need to, in addition to mitigating, in addition to reducing impact, we also need to adapt to the changes that are already locked into environmental systems that are going to have immense impact on how we are going to live, how we will be able to live our lives in the coming years. So this is called resilience, very important concept. But that's not all. Hypothetically or theoretically, there can be multiple sustainable and resilient futures. But not all of them are just futures. So what do I mean by just? Justice is a concept that has entered into this debate in the last decade. So first of all, we need to ensure justice within our generation. So, you know, global south versus global north, and who has caused the harm, and who's going to bear the burdens, and etc., all of that. And also intragenerational justice. So, future generations and us, are we actually going to leave them a world within which they will be able to meet their own needs? But increasingly also interspecies justice. So there's a lot of debate going on about human exceptionalism and etc. in relation to particularly coming from biodiversity crisis discourse. So essentially, in order to achieve a sustainable, resilient and just future, we need sustainable transformations, and some of these are already unfolding. And sustainable transformations are structural, long-term, radical changes in socio-technical ecological systems. These processes are highly complex, dynamic and long-term. When I say long-term, I mean long-term, not business cycle long-term. They have very large stakeholder base. Well, I have already talked about intergenerations, intragenerations and interspecies, so they challenge power structures because they replace, or they aim to replace, societal institutions that are not serving us anymore. And they're underlined by high uncertainty. We cannot manage, optimize, control sustainable transformations. The best we can do is to steer them, in best case. So that's the sustainability science and transitions background. Now let's move to design. So for 24 years now, I'm in sustainable design field. And a few years ago, with a colleague of mine from Brunel University, we wrote a book and looked at how the field has evolved, what kind of design approaches have been developed throughout its evolution, and where the field is now. So it's, if you're interested, it's a very accessible book, as in it's open access, but also we have written it not for academic community only, but for anyone who would like to understand, who would like to kind of make a very fast entry into sustainable design. So the electronic version of it is open access. So what we have found multiple things. I'm not going to get into all of it, but we have found that there are 6 innovation levels in design for sustainability at the moment. So in its evolution, it started with a focus on singular issues, such as hazardous materials, or very inefficient engines, etc. Was very short-term focused and was very reactionary. So it was mainly reacting to risk, perceived risk, and also legislative demands. But then the field expanded and became very systemic. And now there's a long-term orientation, very strategic orientation in it, and it is proactive. When we wrote the book, the 6th level was emerging, but now the 6th level is very well established as well. So I work with businesses. My PhD was with businesses, and I have been working with businesses a lot since then. And what I'm observing is huge change since I finished my PhD 13 years ago. Now everybody is on board, which is great, because before no one was listening to to us, to me. But at the moment, the focus is in these 3 levels, mainly. They are low-hanging fruits. They're very essential. They have to be focused on. And it's driven mainly by industry standards, legislation, supply chain vulnerabilities, etc. I call innovation that is happening at the moment across these 3 levels sustainability as usual. So business as usual became sustainability as usual. And very fundamental, very important, but not enough, because we really need to be innovating across all of these 6 levels, which I call beyond sustainability as usual innovation, with references to a colleague from the US, actually. So we need to be strategic and systemically thinking, and innovation at these top 2 levels are about generating new imaginaries of new socio-technical ecological systems, developing policy foresight that is going to actually support these imaginaries to be, infrastructured and installed and developed. A lot of experimentation is necessary because we really don't know what kind of new systems is going to actually be sustainable, resilient, and just. So we need to do local, low-cost, kind of quick, real-life experiments of policy ideas. And we also need to develop new partnerships and new collaboration models. Abstract? Maybe. So bringing this to the context of a company, which is impossible because companies are part of larger society and socio-technical ecological systems, but maybe this makes it a little bit more relatable for you. So this is a model I developed in my PhD, and it's still valid, although I'm using it increasingly more to find out what is happening here and at this border, which I'm going to explain. So in this model, what I am saying is that businesses need to engage with transformation visions of society, which now is actually starting to happen. But I also think that businesses should really co-lead, because in our political economic system, if business moves, everything will move. If business doesn't move, nothing will move. So in that sense, I do think business leadership is really important. And in order to move towards these transformation visions that are co-generated with the rest of the society, companies need these beyond sustainability as usual innovation strategies. So what we are observing at the moment is there is this divide between transforming business and normal business, meaning there are people in companies, particularly in large companies, because large companies have more resources, and more often than not, in R&D departments, there are these people who are doing a lot of kind of bottom-up work to get their companies to start to think about these long-term transformations. And they're getting very frustrated. In fact, a large Finnish company very recently shut down their strategic foresight team, which broke my heart immensely at this time. But anyway, you need to really give voices to the people who are working, trying to pull up this beyond sustainability as usual innovation strategies off the ground. And you need to do this, you need to be engaging with transforming business while normal business continues, because normal business has to continue for the company to continue, because the company is embedded in the current systems, which are changing and needs to change. So then how do you do that? It's a very big strategic question that every company faces and will face. What I'm observing now is that there is huge tension between normal business and transforming business. There are people who want the company to be engaged with the transformation conversation, long-term thinking, systemic thinking, a bit visionary thinking. But then normal business is about, okay, which products we're going to sell tomorrow? Where's the demand? What's the market? And of course, money talks. But my message is that I think every company needs to find ways to amplify the voices that are coming from transforming business, and also start developing beyond sustainability as usual strategies, maybe initially as shadow track strategies, so parallel strategies to your normal business strategy, and a part of the strategy should be that strategy takes over normal business strategy in the longer run. Why? Because unfortunately, we are kind of living in a conundrum. So this is like the Bermuda Triangle. This is the business, looks at the market, market knows nothing. This is the policymakers, looks at the business in order to make, more stringent policy. And businesses follow policy, legislation, or market. So there's this kind of, Bermuda Triangle that really needs someone to show the leadership of actually we're going to do this. Because otherwise, there's no way out of it. The policies, I know, current policies and coming policies are already very challenging for companies. I know that. But on the other hand, they are not enough. They're not enough for the longer run. And there are these critical uncertainties that I think many businesses are not thinking about, but they should. So first, we don't know how much warming is going to be locked into the atmosphere. And we don't know its short and long-term consequences, impacts. And then we also don't know, whether there's going to be huge runaway climate change events or not. And these can shift entire socio-ecological systems, in some cases rapidly. Second, we didn't talk much about biodiversity crisis, but it's also super important, particularly for everything, but also our food systems. So degree and pace of addressing biodiversity crisis and breaches to planetary boundaries. You may be thinking, I'm developing technology, what's biodiversity to do with me? Everything. Every piece of technology consumes natural resources, which are home for all sorts of species. So imagine the water that goes into producing one laptop. That water could have been the water of a fish or a bird in a wetland, and etc. So biodiversity is very relevant for also manufacturing, as well as any business that actually relates to consuming energy. And then there is this kind of discussion about green transitions versus degrowth in Europe at the moment in policy arenas. So the assumed and real potential of decoupling economic growth from material throughput. A lot of researchers say that it's not possible to do this to the extent that is necessary and at the pace that is necessary. But I am agnostic because, hot debate going on there. But there's a possibility that Green Deal not being a good deal. And then finally, we don't really know timing, scope, and geographies of social collapses. I'm not saying that whether there will be social collapses or not. There is going to be social collapses. According to certain arguments, they're already happening. But where these social collapses will happen, will they be very localized? Will they be more regionalized? Will it be global? And what kind of impacts it will have on our lives, our businesses, our companies, our essentially us on a day-to-day basis. So then, this was the design and innovation part. Now, or partly sustainability doom and gloom, partly design and innovation part. Now I'm going to move forward with anticipatory and anticipation and future studies part. Okay, so how do we work with this kind of, super complex uncertainties that are well beyond our kind of, tiny little company, because compared to the meta objects that we are talking about, like climate change, any conglomerate even is a tiny little entity. So how do we approach these? Well, I use preposterous imagination. This is not all of my work. This is part of my work. because I kind of, I started in my PhD with strategic foresight, and that was very exciting. Any company strategists here working with foresight? Okay. So I don't think strategic foresight is enough in terms of its transformative potential. So I'm working with transformative and critical futures, genre of future studies. And before, I would work with plausible and desirable futures, but that's not anymore cutting it. Because if it were cutting it, this work has been going on for 40 years, there would have been a significant change, and it's not happening. So then, and because now the pace of change that's needed is really increased, and the amount of change that is needed also increased, we need to think about, how do we use futures a little bit differently. So I'm using preposterous futures. What does preposterous mean? So these are different types of futures. Possible futures, likely futures, probable futures, etc. This is quite a famous figure in future studies, known as the futures cone. Preposterous level is added a little bit recently. Preposterous is about a future idea, future image that makes you go, that's not possible. No, that's crazy. Oh, that is absurd. Come on, that's never going to happen. So when that happens, you really need to stop, watch yourself, and then think, oh, why did I think that that future is actually impossible, not possible, not feasible, absurd, crazy, etc. Because our ideas of what is going to happen in the future, what can happen in the future, what should happen in the future are our ideas. Future is not out there. Future has not happened yet, and we are active agents in making, futures happen in the future. So the images that we put out there as futures are our ideas about the futures today. So if you are giving a particular reaction to an image of the future, there is potential for groundbreaking new openings. Because if you challenge your assumptions about why a future is impossible or absurd, if you really do that work, you might realize that, can that assumption be challenged? Maybe. How can that be challenged in this way? And if it is challenged, what kind of new opportunities are opening? So this is very different futures or strategic work than strategic foresight does. But I really enjoy this kind of work. One, because I think it's very powerful. Two, because I think this is the kind of futures work we really need for sustainable transformations. And three, I, of course, am embedded in a creative field. So I really like to bring in that dimension into these very, very serious, very fearful conversations on, what's the future going to be like? This is a very simple example from my work when I was in Australia. I was part of this fantastic large consortium project which had research, public sector as well as government, and aimed to develop visions, scenarios and pathways for transitioning Australian cities to resilient and post-carbon futures. Long project, I'm not going to get into the detail. There was a lot of analytical work in it, but also a lot of creative work in it. So this is the creative work part. So this is one of the images that one of our commissioned designers produced after a visioning workshop with stakeholders. What this shows is, this is very iconically Melbourne. That's Yarra River. And then you may not be able to see, but up there, it's 55 degrees Celsius. And it's not unrealistic because Australia's main climate change, one of the main climate change challenges is increasing frequency of very severe heat waves. So this is under the river, there's this cavity, and there are, I don't know, thousands or hundreds of people partying. So this is a very preposterous image, because, you know, okay, what is the future of resilient and post-carbon future of Melbourne? Very preposterous image, but the idea is not to look for, again, feasibility, possibility. With this image, two things happened. One, I discovered that Melbourne actually has one of the world's largest urban exploration groups, and urban exploration groups are secret because what they do is illegal. And they have developed developed a map of the entire storm water drainage system under Melbourne. And more so, you can actually acquire this from them for free. All you need to do is send a letter, a snail mail, because, you know, electronic is traceable, to a post box, give your address, and they send you the entire map. I mean, imagine that as a resource in relation to urban context. So that was, for me, very exciting. But also, when we were talking about this image with the municipality people, they came to this realization that, hang on a minute, because one of the challenges is how are we going to keep people cool, you know, when the heat wave hits, when our grid cannot really hold all of the cranking of air conditioning. So there's a lot of thinking going on about this in many urban contexts that are, of course, you know, facing heat wave challenges, in Melbourne as well. So they realized, hang on a minute, maybe stormwater drainage channels can actually be also used for adaptation purposes. And that was, you know, that opened a new kind of door for the municipality in relation to their thinking of how is this city going to adapt to climate change. And why is this important? Why preposterous imagination is important? Because what we imagine has immediate consequences on what we do, which then have consequences on how the futures unfold. Every engineer who develops products knows the concept of planned obsolescence, right? So designing planned obsolescence in the products has been among the legitimate duties of engineers, product developers, industrial designers for the entire 20th century. And still, it is actually happening despite all of the repair, circular economy, etc. talk. So this was imagined by an economist to end the Great Depression in 1930s. And then it actually changed the course of history. We have become a consumerist culture and addicted to, our economy relies on buying stuff that we don't need to impress people that we don't care. And in this cycle of consumption, we have essentially created the problems that we are trying to come out of today. So this vision, I mean, of course it worked. It, of course, helped the economy and etc. So I'm not saying that it was a bad idea. It was a good idea for its time. But, you know, it essentially had a lot of consequences. It changed the whole economic systems, political economic systems. So now, let's take a few years back. Let's go before Industrial Revolution started. Even during Industrial Revolution, you know, because not everyone was privileged enough to consume the mass products of industrial production in its early days. Not that they're now. And tell someone who wears a dress or a cloth, hands-on, by themselves, most probably, or their spouses, and tell that person, so I have this brilliant idea. We're actually going to design into the products an end date. It's not about the material life. It's not about the life of the engines. It's just, you know, this is going to break so that people are going to buy new stuff. Imagine that. It would be a crazy idea. It would even be an inconceivable idea because it comes from a system that that person is not part of. So preposterous imagination is exactly like this. There are futures out there that our current knowledge, with our current knowledge, we may not be able to, feasibly imagine. But if we imagine preposterous futures, we might be able to open paths of innovation. And I'm using innovation in its broad sense, not in its product, service, innovation sense, also cultural innovation, social innovation. There might be possibilities to find, maybe a little bit more human-friendly pathways through these centuries of doom and gloom. So I'm going to show you some examples of my current work. Maybe, I know all of this was maybe too abstract, too high level for you. So this is the luxury that we academics have, we do this kind of work. But hopefully these examples will give you an idea on how what I have talked about can actually, or does actually, take place in real life, in my real life. So this is a project, very small but super fun project I did with VTT. VTT is Finnish Technical Research Center. So VTT, like some other R&D environments, are working on cellular agricultural technologies. For anyone who might not be familiar with cellular agriculture, simply put, cellular agriculture is growing food in petri dish. So growing food from animal and or plant cells as a hope for, contributing to sustainable food system transformations. VTT doesn't work with animal cells, but VTT works with plant cells. Finland is leading in terms of the amount of innovation coming up, like many startups are working on cellular agricultural products. However, European Union legislation bureaucracy is super slow because these are novel food products, so there are a lot of, kind of bureaucratic processes that they need to go through before they get permission to sell these in European market. But then they sell in Singapore and in the US. So VTT was interested in, okay, how can we get people to think about this technology constructively and critically, people as in policymakers, but also consumers. And they approached me because I happened to write a paper on experiential futures a few years back. And in that conceptual paper, I argued that these transformation processes are super elitist. They're not democratic. It happens only among experts, but then the whole public, the whole public will be impacted by the decisions that are made in these transformation circles. And they need to be democratized. And I hypothesize or theorize that experiential futures could make that happen. Experiential futures is essentially creating experiences of a future image or a future situation or a future idea, scenario, in the now, in the form of an artistic installation or a design intervention, etc., so that the cognitive challenge of imagining future, which is we are human and we are challenged by that, is overcome, and then the general public can be part of these conversations on what is the desirable future for actually not only a small group of people, but for everyone. So we designed this experiential futures policy arenas, essentially a full fine dining restaurant experience, complete with designed menus, and menus had these cellular agricultural products. So this is, for example, an ice cream from milk, cellular agriculturally produced milk. Same for this avocado, cellular agriculturally produced avocado. These are, of course, not, but hypothetically. And then there was a butler, there were waiters. It was a fine dining experience. But around the table, there were essentially a conversation. At each table, there was a researcher. And at each table, there were set questions to get the participants discuss in relation to policy issues and cultural acceptance issues regarding cellular agriculture. Really fun project. Next up, this is a consulting project, so I do also consulting. And Hitachi, 2-3 years ago, the UK headquarters design lab based in R&D. I have 5 minutes left, so they approached me, and they said, okay, so it turns out that you are one of the leading experts in transition design. We really would like you to help us developing a methodology so that we can engage with our stakeholders about energy transitions. And I don't do these things on my own unless it's a research project, but this wouldn't be able to be a research project, short time, little resources. So I collaborate with Fly Transition Design, and we worked on this project for 3 months, and we developed a methodology for Hitachi to use, and it was essentially a design process, so an iterative development of the methodology, as we were also kind of unpacking energy transitions in the UK, specifically how it relates to the UK households. And the reason why I really like this project is because the group who approached us are one of those people in, R&Ds of really big companies. I mean, Hitachi, imagine that, who are trying to bring these transformation conversations into the mainstream of their companies. And among everything else that they need to do on their day-to-day business work, they also really wanted to run this from a very bottom-up way. And they created, resources, time, etc., and they're still pushing for this. And finally, this is a consortium project, Nordic Consortium. It's a research project, 4 years long research project, very interesting, also very challenging project. So I mentioned about interspecies justice. These days we talk a lot about more than human design. In urban environments particularly. So this project brings together urban ecologists, environmental psychologists, human physiologists, lighting design researchers, digital twin simulation experts, and us, the weird artistic designerly Aalto team. Our role is to develop a design methodological framework for more than human design, and also to help the integration of knowledge across this very interdisciplinary and quite diverse team. So this project aims to mediate the needs or find ways of mediating the needs of people and wildlife in urban green environments during Nordic dark season in the context of lighting design. So my team's desire, because urban ecologists is really curious about, what species come and eat the food at night. He has very expensive gear like these camera traps and etc. And after 3 years, he had nothing captured in those cameras. Never mind. We are very passionate about, okay, how do we plant the seeds of transforming, urban planning regimes that are very rigid, very kind of old school, suitable for an industrial world. And this, in this project, or we use this project as a leverage to put that onto the agenda. And now we have started to talk about not lighting design, but how can we design with darkness? Because it is a given in the Nordic dark environment. And I'm sure you're thinking, oh yeah, we get very dark winters in Germany too. No, you don't. Come to Finland. But I hope that gives you these examples, gives you an idea on how preposterous thinking can be used, how I'm using it, why it's important, and what kind of doors or paths that kind of futuring work can open. That's me. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Idil. Very insightful. Are there any questions? We have quite some time for questions or discussions. Yes, Thomas, great. Thank you for the icebreaker. Thank you, Idil. It was very insightful and giving me some inspiration. And in my past, 20 years ago, everyone was on board for economics or for ecological transformation. And nowadays, I see reactionary movements and also some kind of, well, it's already too late, doomsday sense. How do you deal with it, and how do you keep yourself from getting depressed when interacting with people like this?
Thank you for that question. First of all, ecological grief is part of my everyday life. Also, it's part of my students' everyday life. You know, these students woke up in a world of climate crisis, and I literally had a happier childhood, although I knew about climate change. So this is, I mean, there's a very long conversation which we cannot have here about hope. What does hope mean? Why do we need to be hopeful, and how can we be hopeful? But one thing, very kind of generic but catchy, if you're a designer or an engineer, you cannot be hopeless. If you are hopeless, go and do something else, because our work is about, even in its minute sense, imagining a future and then taking action to create it. You know, creating a product, designing a product is also making a future. So in the essence of our profession, I think there has to be hope. And I do spiritual Aikido for, everything else, because 24 years in this doom and gloom every day, too much. But anyway, backlash, well, yes. I mean, not the whole society is backlashing, of course, but I must say that we have immediate worries, such as, war in Europe. That's a huge, I don't know how is your psychology here, but in Finland, we are very paranoid. Iodine stocks just depleted in one day in Finland in February 2022. I don't have iodine at my home because, if hell breaks loose, I am with the people. So I do think that, I mean, this is a question for a sociologist. So I'm out of my comfort zone here, but I interpret this as in a way, normal, unfortunate reaction, because we are at the moment, we are under immediate stress of certain things, also economic, of course, like rising loan interest rates and inflation and this and that. These people, of course, immediately react. And though people also immediately react to the experiential more so than theoretical. So we are also experiencing at least some early impacts of climate change quite clearly. So I don't know what's going to happen, but it's also not my forte to predict. I hope that there is going to be, and this is not this shouldn't be on the shoulders of individuals. We need to do what we can do, but really there's the intergovernmental game being played. And we need, international level governance of these issues. So that's all I can say, but there are a lot of very interesting sociological questions there. Yes.
Hi. One argument that I often hear in the business context is that why should I, with my 10-employee company, shut down the computers at night when in other countries like the US or in China, they do a lot less for sustainability, and it's a global thing because it only works if everybody participates. What would you tell these people, are we in the lighthouse function in Europe? Or is it really like this, if we stop emitting carbon from tomorrow in Europe, the world will still go down because the others don't participate?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of things that I can say. I'm just going to think what is diplomatically most, nice and also short. First of all, I think the simplest answer is because we're a system, we're parts of a system, and every agent influences how the system works and reacts. So this is not about a competition between China and us. It is a responsibility of being human. Then the second thing I want to say is, well, I mean, West is a little bit responsible in, the crisis, more responsible in where we are now, historically speaking, than the rest of the world. So we also have a moral responsibility in the global north to take action, whether you're a small company or not. It's really not difficult to turn your computers off. That's all I'm going to say. And if that's all you can do, I think it's wonderful, but you should do it. And I really don't want to go into the moral argument, but there's a really huge moral argument there. And that is not coming from the business imperatives or being small business or being big business. You're not a business. This is not a business. A business is a collection of people working together to achieve a goal that is the goal of the company. But you are, as a person, also all sorts of other things. So, I don't know, do you close your computer, turn off your computer when you leave? No, I'm glad that you are doing it, but I don't really think that we should be discussing at this time in history, China is emitting more, why am I turning off my computer? Turn your computer off. You know, that political discussion happens elsewhere, and it's a very serious discussion, and unfortunately it's not going anywhere, and that's why we are moving towards a 3.6 degrees Celsius world. And it's unimaginable for humanity. And to put it in context, we have the luxury, we evolved as Homo sapiens sapiens in the luxury of a very stable climate. And Earth's climate had not been this stable ever. So from agricultural revolution until now, we have benefited from a very mild climate system, stable climate system. So just think about that. These things are really much more important than having this discussion of, but China is emitting, and we are only 10 people. No, that is an impact. That's this much of an impact. But do that, but there are all sorts of other things that you can also do, we can do. But I do think that international governance is really the key, and also businesses play a huge role in our capacity as a society to transform. Businesses are holding us off, as well as some businesses are kind of pushing us forward.
Yeah, I have another question. I really liked the futuristic image you shared from Melbourne. And I was wondering whether you do some research or heard of research using generative AI to create such images, and where do they fall in the cone model? Is it more like the...
Last week I was at Anticipation 2024 conference in UK, Lancaster, and there was actually a researcher talking about generative AI and speculation and imagination. In another conference this year, in Design Research Society conference, there was a very interesting project from MIT's Climate Lab using generative AI to kind of democratize imagination for post-climate futures. So there's, of course, a role for generative AI, but there's also a lot of skepticism because at the moment, at least, AI is still a little bit clunky, and everything that it generates is based on the past. So how much, how much creative interpretation capacity generative AIs will have will determine if their role can be positive and significant or not. Does this answer your question? But I make my students play with that because I get them generate, new imaginaries, and AI makes it very accessible. Oh, that Melbourne thing, it's super manual. It's only 10 years ago we did that project, and I wish we had the generative AI. We wouldn't pay all of that money to the designers. Yeah, I mean, of course, people are discussing, and this is not, again, my expertise area, but people are discussing the biases embedded in generative AI. So, the modeling algorithm bias, this bias, and that bias. So there's criticism, but I do think that it can be a, potentially powerful tool for, getting imagination going in the broader society, because we really need that.
Okay, one last question before we head into the break, if there is one. No? Then I invite everybody to have the discussion afterwards. Thank you again. Great talk.